Welcome to the Schmooze, Calgary's weekly community podcast where we bring together the voices, events, and stories shaping Jewish life in our city. I'm Don Shapiro with Jared Shore. Pull up a chair. Let's schmooze. On today's Schmooze, we had, I guess, two of my favorite people, and two of the people, outside my immediate family, outside my wife, outside my kids, uh, two people who have influenced my life in a positive way more than any other. And that's Marnie Bondar and Dahlia Libin, the former co-chairs of Holocaust and human rights, remembrance, and education. And my God, just what a two of the most inspirational ladies I've ever met in my life.
Look, they're synonymous in this city with Holocaust education. The work that they've done, we talk about Here to Tell. We talk about their partnerships with the public library, with the National Music Center. You want something done, you talk to Marnie and Dahlia because they take a small bit of inspiration and they turn it into meaningful projects, education. Um, you got to hear it. You got to hear it. You got to hear what they talk about. You got to see the work that they've done. I'm grateful to call them two very close personal friends.
Yeah, and, what's interesting when you take a look at them as the co-chairs of Holocaust education for the past many years is, I have a trip coming up. I'm going to be going to Israel pretty soon for my dad's 80th, and we're going to be stopping off in Paris. And I never went to the Holocaust Museum in Paris. So I just did a little bit of research. How does the Paris Holocaust Museum compare to, Yad Vashem or some other museums? And it
Mhm.
says, it's very much more of an educational type, very direct, and Yad Vashem is more vast, and Washington D.C. is more personal and emotional, right? So it has these different distinctions, and you can't put all of the different elements of Holocaust education that Marnie and Dahlia brought in into one singular box because it is a little bit of all of it. It's educational. They brought in, you know, Holocaust educators from Poland to help out with symposium. It's emotional from personal stories. It's a little bit of everything, and it's vast, and it's a small, and it's their flexibility in education is a unique trait.
Well, what, Don, as you're talking about that, and we could compare, what different places have done, what different cities have done to honor the survivors and the memory of survivors and those who perished. It reminds me of Shuv saying, Calgary does something right. And this is another example. Like this is Marnie and Dahlia have been such a boon for the Calgary Jewish community and the Calgary community as a whole. But my goodness, the work that they've done has been an exemplar across the world. So yeah, they're amazing. They're amazing. Okay, speaking of, you said you're stopping over in Paris. Speaking of France, it's a great segue to the event that's happening on January 27th at the Public Library, at the Central Library. Again, this is our partnership that Marnie and Dahlia were really instrumental in forging initially several years ago, and I've worked with some of the folks at the public library through Marnie and Dahlia for International Holocaust Remembrance Day. They're amazing. These are like people who understand the importance of educating people on where hate goes, and it seems like a lot of people are forgetting that. The public library and our partners there have been amazing. So, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th, at the public library, 7 o'clock, is a program called Le Chemin des Juifs. And it is a story of a road in northern France where Belgian Jews were forced into labor between 1942 and 44. It's going to be a live performance of the original score and the film screening, and then a live Q&A with the director, Daniel. Bhattacharya. And so you can go on to the public library's website, or you can go on to Jewish Calgary's website and register. I saw something that said you could also, it was going to be available online, but check that out. I'm not sure if we can track that down. We'll put that in the show notes, but this is always a very meaningful event, and so register. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, and all these events, I think that one of the things that if we were to leave everybody, and I guess my hope of leaving everybody is not only A, to learn about all of the different educational tools that are available through Holocaust education, it's that two people who have an idea and have passion and have heart and are willing to put in the time and the work can make a huge difference. And Marnie and Dahlia have made a huge difference. And that is not in any way to denigrate what Holocaust education was prior. It was important, it was impactful. Before they ever became the co chairs, I was already moved immensely by what Calgary's Holocaust Education Department
Mhm.
through Federation was able to achieve, growing it, making it larger, bigger, and like you said, um, there something about this community is doing it right. They never lack volunteers. They never lack help or assistance, and it just really goes to show what heart, spirit, and community can bring together.
Totally. And you know what, Don, you said it earlier and you mentioned it again now, like the number, they acknowledge how important the volunteers were, especially in the Here to Tell project. But you know, and Marnie and Dahlia are incredibly skilled people, but what's their biggest asset? Their passion, their drive. And so if you've got passion and you've got drive, the community needs you. Your involvement, your story is impactful, and so they're inspiring certainly from the content that they bring, but they should also be inspiring because they were just two people that said, "I want to do it," and they did it.
100%. And I guess I think with that, let's get right into the episode. Ladies and gentlemen, it's our schmooze with Marnie Bondar and Dahlia Livin. Thank you so much.
The Schmooze is your local Calgary Jewish community podcast. We're here to build community, highlight advocacy initiatives, and help Jewish Calgarians and our allies better understand the incredible work that has made our community so strong. You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on YouTube. And if you have an idea for a guest or just want to send us some feedback, send us a note at schmoozeyyc@gmail.com. And make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We're here for you, Jewish Calgary. All right, let's schmooze.
Well, folks, as promised, we now, and I want to get right into it. The Schmooze is so happy and proud to bring in I guess now the former co-chairs of Holocaust and Human Rights Education, Remembrance and Education, Marnie Bondar and Dahlia Levin. Welcome, ladies.
Thank
Hi,
you.
thanks. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I thank you so much for being here. We have Jared and I have literally, not figuratively, literally a million questions. But I think that where we need to start is kind of at the top and get to know you guys a little bit. So, Dahlia, tell us a little bit about where you came from. Are you were born and raised in Calgary? What a little bit of what kind of led you into being part of the community at large before the idea or the opportunity of Holocaust education even became part of the picture.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I mean, Marnie and I are both just very excited to be here and talk about some of the stuff we've done. Yes, I am born and raised Calgarian. Grew up in a very small family. I learned very early on that my background was a little different from my friends. I didn't have extended families, and that was because my family was murdered in the Holocaust. And just from a young age, it was something that was just part of who we were, part of my identity, both Jewish and even part of my non-Jewish identity. Just the idea that my family experienced something incredibly sad and traumatic, and it was my grandparents. I mean, we'll get into that. Were a huge part of kind of growing up and talking about it. So yes, the work in Holocaust education came later, but as far as in Holocaust, immersing myself in Holocaust and understanding it and learning my family story is from my entire life.
Marnie?
Marn, how about you? Tell us a little bit about how you came to all of this.
Yeah, similar in some ways as Dahlia. Um, all four of my grandparents, also Holocaust survivors. And I was especially close to one of my bubbies here in Calgary. I was not born here. I was born in Edmonton, but grew up in Calgary, did school in Edmonton, and lived there for 15 years before coming back to Calgary. But regardless of what city I was in, I got to spend a ridiculous amount of time with my bubby Frida. And so grew up very much knowing her stories, and I always sensed there was something unique about her. Um, she didn't always follow the more stereotypical Holocaust survivor who, like my other grandparents, for example, who lived with a little bit of fear, didn't want their names in Jewish phone books, chose to live a little bit quieter without making waves. My bubby Frida lived larger than life. And for many years growing up, again, she'd come to Edmonton. I would take her to go speak at the annual Holocaust Symposium. And so I grew up very much knowing her testimony. And then over time, when she was no longer able to share it, um, I started, and she would give me pointers and notes of what I had done well or not. And it actually really helped inform the presentation that I still share to this day on my bubby Frida. And I try very hard to really emulate her language and her mannerisms and the comments that she would make with students. So yeah, like Dahlia, it's very much in my blood.
Marn, so you talk about all your grandparents being survivors, but it's Frida's story that you have told and really that's been the essence of a lot of your presentations. And so is it strictly because she had this unique way about her? And I mean, was her story unique? Was it why her story specifically?
One of the things that I came to realize over time, because originally I did want to share all four grandparents, um, is something that actually Yad Vashem does, which is take big picture Holocaust and share it and make it personal with one story to bring it to light. And my maternal grandparents ended up in Russia during the Holocaust. And so it's a different type of story. Especially when going into schools, a lot of times what kids know about is concentration camps. They have a little bit of knowledge, but maybe not the level of depth that we're hoping to leave them with at the end. And so my bubby Frida's story is somewhat very typical of where many of our survivors come from, Auschwitz. Um, and she has a really, really excellent presentation, her testimony, where she covers life in Poland growing up with a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism, life in the ghetto, what it was like for family members to help save her along the way, uh, enduring a 3-day train ride to Auschwitz, the displaced persons camp, and ending up in Israel. And then eventually making it to Canada. And so there's so many touch points within her story that we can really get into the meat of things with students. And so that's one of the main reasons. And she was also an incredible speaker. And so that really resonates, and I try to emulate.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Now, Don, sorry, I've got to follow up because I remember that, Dahlia, so full disclosure to our listeners, I have known Marnie and Dahlia since we were all kids. And so they're both, in addition to fellow Jewish community members, also dear friends. Dahlia, I remember picking up the kids from school one day and you telling me about a very unique experience of connecting with someone and finding more information. And to me, even though you're talking about growing up and being aware of what had happened, and it seemed to be the spark. Am I wrong? Am I right? And if so, tell us a little bit about that experience.
Um, I'm very impressed you remember it. You're absolutely right. And I know exactly what you're talking about. In 2019, my family was going to Israel, and I started to dabble into the database of Yad Vashem at that time because I knew.
And can we've talked, sorry to interrupt, but we've talked about Yad Vashem a couple times. And so for those of you at home who don't know what Yad Vashem is, Yad Vashem is the organization, in addition to the brick and mortar memorial in Israel, they're also a research institute, an educational institute. It is the body that is dedicated to the memory of the Holocaust.
Yes.
Okay.
And yeah. And so not being on their website, there's a database. It's a central database. And I had never in my life gone onto this website. But when I knew we were going to Israel and we were going to be going to Yad Vashem, I started to, and I got the spelling of names and towns, and I just started going into this database. Um, One of the things my maternal grandmother didn't openly talk about too much with us, her grandchildren, but we were aware of it. She was married during the Holocaust. In fact, that's a story of itself. She was a partisan fighter in the forest, and she married this man who saved her, and they got married in the forest. And the way I grew up knowing like little bits about this man was that she really loved him, and it was a really tragic love story. And but my grandfather, she also loved, and so we just didn't talk about it too much.
Hmm.
I did know his name, and so I started entering that into the database. One thing led me to another. I ended up locating this man's great niece. So he passed, he didn't survive the Holocaust, but his brother did. And his brother was in Israel. And so his brother had a family. And I reached out and this woman, and it turns out they had been trying to find us for many years.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
And so we ended up, she really was a core part of my spark in terms of really going deep into the Holocaust. She actually worked at the museum at Yad Vashem, and she had access to she was just a wealth of knowledge, just a brilliant person. And so things I didn't understand or things I didn't know how to search, she was helping me find. I now have, death certificates of family members from Auschwitz. It's very rare. They don't exist for everyone, and they're very bogus. But she was able to help me kind of find things. So we ended up meeting in Israel and just have been so close ever since. She views me as family. I view her as family. And it's a really special thing that happened. I'm very fortunate that I was able to find her. And, there are still stories circulating today of families finding long lost survivors even after 80 years. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I want to go back a little bit in time for both of your stories, and I'm just conscious, um, especially after last week's schmooze with Yael Berkovich. So I have a quick question, then a follow-up. Throughout school and high school, were you guys involved in Seat Teen? Was that available? And CSY and BBYO and March of the Living? Like, what did you go to Hebrew school? Did you go to like how involved were you in the community at large? During those years.
Yeah, I did elementary school at the what was then the Calgary Hebrew School,
Okay.
um, BBYO, USY conventions, all of that. And then in terms of Holocaust, I always dabbled a little bit, predominantly with my bubby Frida, but sometimes we get involved in other projects as they arose. And that sort of kept me going for many, many years. Yeah.
And Dahlia, what about you? Were you involved in sort of BB camps and all that sort of stuff? Or was that part of the just the regular nature of the stuff that you were involved in?
Yeah, I think I was very quite involved. I did attend Jewish day school. I did start going to summer camp, Jewish summer camp, when I was 14. And I was very involved in BBYO. I did attend the March of the Living. So the March of the Living is a trip for high school students to go to Poland and tour the concentration camps. It was a week around Poland and then a week in Israel. So when I was 16, I did go on that trip. And when I came back, I started to volunteer with Holocaust survivors, going to symposium and introducing them and facilitating questions. Yeah, Eliezer Zukir was the survivor that I would often accompany. And I've just, it was, yeah, just that was basically my beginning of Holocaust education.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it seems that you guys were involved in those things both of you from a fairly younger age. Now, the reason I bring up Yael's our schmooze with her last week is she mentioned that even today, like when she went to high school and part of the curriculum, part of nationalism in grade 11, they started doing Holocaust education, and even today, some of the other kids suddenly think it's really funny to do the Hitler salute, think it's funny to draw swastikas around the school, like like and to kind of fall into some of those tropes and think that it's funny. Now, when all of us were in high school, not to date ourselves, but this is in the fallout of what happened in Alberta education, where Keekstra and I won't get into more detail about Keekstra, other than he was a Holocaust denier teacher who would teach Holocaust denialism to his students, and then it blew up, and I think that we're going to be talking about that in more detail at some point in the future. But um, going through that, and knowing that that was taught 90 minutes from here,
Mhm.
right? Did that strengthen your bond with Holocaust education? Did you feel that, like, because you were in public school as well, was there that kids making fun of Jews, and making Jewish jokes, like Holocaust jokes and swastikas and Hitler salutes and all that sort of stuff when you were in school?
I didn't personally experience that as a kid, but what happened with Keekstra was monumental in terms of what ended up happening with Calgary and Edmonton Jewish Federations starting the Holocaust Education Symposium. That's over 40 years ago.
Right.
And a lot of our survivors, including my bubby, were outraged. So, up until that time, a lot of the Holocaust sharing of experiences were happening at home with close friends. A lot of the Holocaust survivors became family with other Holocaust survivors because, uh, they didn't have the family members. This was the stand up and take notice moment. For example, my bubby said, how dare there be somebody who said that something I had gone through did not happen? I was there. And so Keekstra really was that starting point, the fire that led so many survivors to come and start sharing their testimony publicly. And we had so many in the early days that would get up and share, and they would fill classrooms, each of them speaking to students, sharing their individual stories. And of course, over time, as we've lost more and more survivors to dementia and old age death, we actually in Calgary have really only two survivors still that like to speak publicly, and one of them prefers when we show her video and then she answers questions. So that's really my background involvement with Keekstra. Although, Dawn, I know you have a story or two about growing up in Red Deer and some of the nasty jokes you had to experience as a kid.
Yeah, it was a different world for sure. But what about you, Dahlia? Did you have any of those experiences? Like, did you guys go? In what high schools did you guys go to? Sorry, Dahlia, or Marnie, what high school did you go to?
Western.
Western. What about you, Dahlia? Did you experience anything like that? The Keekstra support, I guess, if you will, throughout your schooling.
I went to high school at Henry Wisewood. Nothing overt per se. I did get a lot of comments. Oh, you're obviously Jewish. You look very Jewish. So those things. And when I was younger, it just hurt because I didn't understand, and it was never said in a, oh, you must be Jewish. Like it was always just a downside. But that was kind of the extent of what would have impacted me personally, like directly. I knew it existed. I wasn't naive to that, but I didn't have it too bad.
It was always amazing that, whether it was, and you're right, like, Dahlia, I share that feeling where it was never, um, even if kids liked you, when they talked about the fact that you were Jewish, it was never a positive fascination. It was just something about you, which is funny because we never really talked about what anybody else was, but everybody knew that we were Jewish. Um, Marn, I remember when you were approached with taking over Holocaust education. It was before it was Holocaust education and human rights, but Holocaust education, and you said, "I'll do it on one condition." And what was that? What was that condition?
Well, it's not exactly how it happened.
Okay.
Nobody approached me. Delia and I have a really funny story on this, and I'll tell the first part, and I bet you Delia will tell the second part because
Okay.
her husband, Kevin, was instrumental in making my dream a reality.
Yeah.
Um, One of my mentors and favorite people on planet Earth is Rabbi Alana Krieger-Lapidus. And she had
Hmm.
been running the program Holocaust Ed and Remembrance for Federation for about 8 or 10 years, and had left the position. And I don't know. I just had an idea of how it could be bigger and better. And my interest has always been the education piece. And Dahlia's a baby. She's a whole 7 years younger than me. She was my younger sister's friend, but I had heard her name repeatedly. I knew who she was. And I knew that Dahlia loved the commemoration pieces. And so I remember kind of in the back of my head thinking, oh, this could be a perfect partnership, education and commemoration. And so I went to speak to then Federation CEO Adam Silver and said, I'd like to run this program for free as a volunteer for you, and I want to do it with Dahlia Libin. The thing is, I had never spoken to Dahlia yet, and hadn't spoken to her in years, and just had this idea. And then I had to, of course, call Dahlia and say, I literally had to use my last name to say, hi, Dahlia, this is Marnie Bondar calling. I have this crazy idea. And then now Dahlia's going to tell you the
Okay.
second
Okay. So Dahlia,
craziness.
pick it up from there.
The phone rings. I don't know this phone number. And yes, it's Marnie Bondar. Hi. Jumps right into it. So I think you and I should take over the Holocaust Department as volunteers. It'll be full time. We won't get paid. What do you think? Yeah,
Sounds like a winner.
sounds like a winner. Like I think I politely, because I had no level of comfort with being open about what I was really thinking, because I didn't know Marnie at the time. I just politely got off and I called my husband and I said, "You'll never believe." Isn't that crazy? So we kind of laughed about it because for a minute, and then later that night, my husband, he said to me, you're always researching, like, and that was what I was going on in my life at that time. I was little kids. I'd drive them to school. I'd come home. I would sit all day researching and reading, and uh, just that was what I did. So he said, "Why don't you actually put that to some practical use?"
Yeah.
And it just clicked. The moment he said that, I thought, "Yeah, you know what? I'm doing this anyway in a different way." And so I called Marnie back and I said, "Okay, let's do it." And we were off to the races.
Okay,
And
Yeah.
so Marnie had this notion of, I see this great work that Alana has done and the people before her. And I want to make it bigger. I want to make it bigger and better and expand it and everything. And so, Dahlia, start us off. How did you guys? What were some of the things that you guys did? First of all, what was going on before? What are some of the things that continue? And then what did you guys add to Holocaust education in Calgary?
So one of the things Marty had just mentioned were the commemorations, which I have always really felt a connection with. And so these are annual commemorations to honor the Holocaust. So every November, there's a commemoration for Kristallnacht, which is the night of broken glass. And that the community comes together and we do a commemorative ceremony. Yom HaShoah is the Jewish day of remembering the Holocaust. And again, there's always a ceremony. So those continued on and have always existed in the community. And so that was part of what we were going to continue to do for the community. And then in addition to that, the education piece. So like Marnie was saying, the survivor presentations, which we would have happened at symposium, and there would have been a bigger pool of Holocaust survivors who were able to go into schools. That was sort of starting to dwindle, and so we were coming in, and in a way, I think COVID did bring an opportunity because these presentations that we were trying to carry out in schools. At the time when we took over, COVID had just hit. And so we brought in a camera and we started to produce videos of Holocaust survivors telling their stories. And this was a way we thought we could kind of bridge the gap during COVID. In the end, it actually was just fate, besheret, that we did that because so many of these survivors can't, they're no longer around, they're no longer able to. So that was one thing we started to do. And it was, that's something that will continue, that the community has now. So those were the two big pillars. And from there, a big project to light. And that was Here to Tell Faces of Holocaust Survivors, which I'm happy to get into if you want me to jump into that now or.
Well, Dawn, why don't you pick up, because we got to hear about Here to Tell, but we got to hear about Symposium. But Dawn, you're itching to jump
oh,
in. You got a question.
your question was my question, and I think
Okay.
that's I think 8 episodes in, we're starting to learn from each other, Jared. That we're starting to read each other's minds. It kind of reminds me of two other people who might not have known each other very well and started working well together. So we get into, what the programming was before, and the programming was great. I mean, I remember how I got involved as a volunteer was my wife, which is Marnie, your CrossFit sister, from back in the day, said, "Hey, Marnie's going to be talking about her bubby. Do you want to go see it?" And it was in a church, and I went, and I sat there astonished because like you mentioned, I grew up in Red Deer. There was no Hebrew school. Red Deer doesn't even have a synagogue, and so there was no BB, there was no C-teen, and so I learned. You guys all talked about people being made fun of for or being excluded or othered for being Jewish. I overcame that by saying I'm Israeli and just I'm Jewish. Remember that? I remember doing that joke, which I would never ever repeat today, right? So I kind of tried to hide that, and then I heard Marnie do that talk, and I remember the first feeling I had was I didn't know we were allowed to do that. And it was such a weird thing. And but from there, you did the Crystal Nuff was there, and Yom HaShoah and Symposium was around, and then you guys to kind of walk into here to tell you started working on a project. What was the inspiration of the project? Because I think it was much different than what it was in the end. So I'd love to understand how your brains worked to create what you did in the end.
I think it was an evolving project. You're really right. Um, I think both Dahlia and I have a true passion for Holocaust survivors. That's the truth. Both of us could sit and hang out with our survivors for hours and be perfectly content. And the idea of how so many of them had created lives of such meaning with hope and resilience in Calgary, or a connection to Calgary, was astonishing for us. And also, there was a real recognition that there was so much that we thought our Jewish community and the Calgary community could learn from our survivors. And so the start of it was actually really silly. I can't remember, Dahlia, if you thought you were going to be the photographer and I was going to be the videographer, or vice versa. But like we're like, oh yeah, we're just gonna go sit around with our survivors and take photos of them and do a snapshot about what their life was like, maybe before and during the Shoah, the Holocaust, and then what they went on to do here in Calgary. And then something really clicked. And Delia and I always talk about that the right people show up when you need them. And you just need to put out your want and wish into the universe, and it'll show up. And so we were insanely fortunate. One of our first interviews was with the incredibly talented Marnie Burkhart, who now goes by the name Marnie Jazwicki, in honor of her Holocaust surviving father.
Mm.
Oh, wow.
And as soon as we connected with her, we knew we had something super cool. It was still COVID. And so we had to figure out a way to bring Holocaust survivors safely to a photo shoot. And so we used my parents' garage. We used the back of a car to shoot photos in. We would attend at assisted living facilities and just show up with people in masks. They would take off their masks for a minute. It really was quite organic. And then as Dahlia like will tell, then the whole videography piece took off. And so what was started as just a photography exhibit took on an insane life of its own.
Well, and even just saying it was a photography exhibit, I mean, not to take anything away from your iPhones or your great photographic eyes, but it wasn't even a photography exhibit. It was you guys trying to spending time and being immersed in, we want to capture these people and their stories as much as we can. And then all of a sudden you had this professional Marnie Jazwicki Burkhart step in, and it went to a whole other level.
Yeah.
Um, so Dahlia, where did Here to Tell end up from there? And now I understand there are new levels to Here to Tell. So tell us what Here to Tell became, and then these layers that have now been built on top of it.
Um, so one of the things that kind of sparked our interest in this project was like what Marnie was talking about, the just how inspiring we find these Holocaust survivors, that they went through so much, and they lived full lives. They didn't hold, they lived fulfilling lives. They felt joy. They built families. They contributed to society. So much of that, and it's not to think they didn't suffer. Even
Hmm.
the ones who went about, didn't complain, they still had the trauma of what they went through. And so when we were starting the project and interviewing Marty Jaswicki as the main photographer, we were very clear and deliberate with what we wanted. This wasn't about getting the perfect photograph. We wanted to capture the lines on people's faces. We wanted to show
Hmm.
lives lived. And that was so important, because we see those lines as just an amazing part of their story. Look at
Hmm.
where these people are today. And so that was really core to how we started to build it out. Um, and then Marnie and I realized, as we were moving forward, the opportunity to educate the story of the Holocaust from both what is the Holocaust, the history of the Holocaust, to what were each of these individual survivors' story, but in a
Hmm.
way that's very concise, easy to understand, and something that students, junior high age, could come and spend some time and learn different stories rather than showing a full testimony of a survivor. You're there for hours.
Hmm.
And how do you do that in a way that's compelling, where you're really trying to educate new generations about what was the Holocaust? And so we did bring in from Yad Vashem. They have ready to print exhibits, and these are available for educational purposes. And there's one that we ended up using as part of the education around the Holocaust, so that people could come to this exhibit, get the basics of what was the Holocaust from the onset to liberation, while immersing themselves in these personal stories. Um, Once we started the process of photographing, Marnie and I, we were with some survivors at a photo shoot, and as they were sitting down in their seats to get their photos taken, they started to talk, and we looked at each other. We said, "There's a really important part of this. This isn't just about us sharing the stories on paper, but let's hear
Hmm.
what they have to say." And so we didn't give direction. We didn't tell them what we wanted them to talk about. We just opened it up, and we had some really tender, vulnerable moments at these photo shoots. It was very emotional for a lot of the survivors. Many of them, it's overwhelming to think about what they went through, and it was really hard. And we actually had survivors who came to photo shoots who then ended up reaching out to us saying, "I can't do this,
Yeah.
pull me out." The thought of having to look at their story, it was too overwhelming. And others were really touched and thinking, why, I didn't realize that my story was that important. And so we had just a big range of reactions from the survivors.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
it was also super fun getting together with the descendants of survivors, because Dahlia and I also had to come up with a way of how are we going to honor survivors that have already passed away.
Hmm.
And so that's where the idea came, to have their images held up in the hands of their direct descendants. And that happened for the vast, like over, I think, 90, 96, 97% of survivors.
Hmm.
And then we only have a few that it didn't happen. And actually, it's one of my favorites where it's one of our survivors who's holding another image of another survivor up in their hands. It's beautiful. Um, it became extraordinary. And the number of people that got involved, I think, was one of the things that also like so touched Dahlia my heart. We had, well, Jared, your wife's aunt was one of our initial teams
Hmm.
that helped create some of the bios. We had a
Hmm.
senior editor, we had a second photographer, Adam Brenner, we had Fidel, we had probably close to 50, 60 volunteers working on helping to create Here to Tell for over a 2-year project. And then my favorite part of the story is, as usual, Dahlia and I decide, well, this has to be bigger than just something that the Jewish community is going to see. This is something that should be at the Glenbow Museum. And so I think Dahlia, you did that original call and called up Nicholas Bell and said, hi, we have an exhibit. We have no experience. And this is an exhibit that should be at the Glenbow. And then it happened. So it
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
wild and incredibly,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'm conscious of a couple of things in regards to this because it was probably one of the most touching, moving, personal exhibits, Holocaust exhibits that I've been to, just because of how close to home some of these stories hit. But when we take a look at some of the more moving Holocaust movies, right? The artistic tool they use is, why is Schindler's List regarded as that? Because you're going through the eyes of Schindler as he grows, as he learns from it. You guys did a 30-minute documentary, which was great, but without that first 5 minutes of both of you understanding and as you explain what that exhibit started from cell phones to what you wanted, that's what is more engaging. And one of the uh, most interesting pieces of feedback that I got when in Edmonton, when it was presented at the art gallery out there, was it was called synonymously an art exhibit as a Holocaust exhibit. And because it really is of a quality that is I mean it's amazing. But since then, an exhibit, a non-permanent exhibit at a museum lasts for a finite amount of time. So it was in the Glenbow. It was around the time of Symposium, and Symposium was there, and you used the Yad Vashem panels and the documentary that you made, and the photos and the stories, and it was amazing. But then Here to Tell is over, and that's it, or it isn't. So what happened? I'm not going to say the day after because I'm sure the mice wheels, the hamster wheels were already rolling before that. But the exhibit ended, and then Here to Tell became what?
Well, it was we we looked at each other, and I remember the conversation where we said, like, we gotta be this can't be the end of Here to Tell. We knew that the exhibit, had the potential to go to other cities. We knew that this was always going to be an open invitation to any families who wanted to honor their families in the Here to Tell collection.
And I just want to interrupt really quick. And when you say, Dahlia, for Here to Tell to go to the other cities, the point is those other cities' local survivors would be the ones that would then be photographed, like, and then it would be increased, and um, the number of survivors would just increase based off that. So it would be much more personalized as well.
That's it. It's a living exhibit, is how
Right.
we view it. The collection of Here to Tell stories is never going to end. As long as anyone wants to submit their family member to the collection, it's always going to be available. However, what we saw during the Glenbow Museum exhibit, basically we had it was there for a number of weeks, and we were able to bring in schools. And so schools were coming in, and Dawn, as you know, you were one of our tour guide educators. We developed a 90-minute experience at Here to Tell. So schools would come, we would spend 30 minutes with the film watching that documentary that Don spoke about, we would spend about 30 minutes talking about the Holocaust and 30 minutes looking at the survivors and their stories. And so we realized that that was working. We had a lot of students as young as, 13, 14 years old, leaving that experience, leaving the exhibit, coming and sharing how they learned so much. They didn't know. They didn't know what the Holocaust was. They didn't know how many Jewish people died in the Holocaust. Uh, they didn't. They didn't really appreciate what it meant to be a Holocaust survivor. And so we kind of realized that there's an opportunity here. And so what we did is we then developed Here to Tell in, excuse me, in the classroom and Here to Tell in the boardroom, which we basically are 90 minutes to 2-hour presentations where we are able to bring the Here to Tell exhibit to schools and to various businesses, companies. And so that's what we've been doing for the last few years.
Amazing.
Yeah, that is fantastic. I think so my family had fortunately left Europe prior to the Holocaust in the early 1900s. So I was not immersed in the same way that you guys were. But what struck me, and you guys, somebody had touched on this. I think both Marnie and Dahlia both touched on this, but the stories of resilience, these individuals did not wallow. There was no self-pity. There was no, I mean, they had moments and they lived with this incredible, painful memory, but they lived full, amazing lives. And so, as you guys are immersed in education and you're bringing kids through and you're involved in symposium, which we've talked about symposium, but again, symposium is a yearly event where hundreds, twice a year, um, hundreds or thousands? How many?
Thousands. Thousands.
Thousands of Calgary high school students and Calgary and surrounding area, because I know we've had some nice support from some of the outlying communities, come through and hear stories from survivors, hear stories from you guys, second and third generation, and learn about the Holocaust. Okay, so big preamble to say the world has changed so much in the last, I mean, it's changed a lot for the Jewish community in the last 2 years, 4 years, 10 years. You guys have been involved in Holocaust education for that long. Now, our world is also different from a mental health perspective. And you think about the trauma that these individuals faced and the trauma that we know second and third generation have faced in taking on some of these very painful memories. What is the experience like now, from both an emotional resilience perspective, knowing the emotional resilience that these survivors had, and that seemingly is a really tough thing for kids these days? Was that something that came out? Did it give them any, did it empower them? Did it change their dynamic? Were they able to say, holy cow, if they did it, I can do it? That's one question. Maybe one of you can address that. And the other question is, knowing the growth of anti-Semitism, where did you see Holocaust education fitting in? So you had kids that came and said, wow, I understand so much more. But we also know these days, like, the most educated people are among the most anti-Semitic. We see this in our universities. We see this. What role is Holocaust education filling? Has it done its job? Do we need to change things? So I'd love to hear from one of you about sort of the emotional resilience perspective and the other from the anti-Semitism perspective. Martin, why don't you start us on the emotional resilience perspective?
These are really massive topics.
Big questions, big ones. Yeah.
Dahlia and I have spent countless hours. And then we brought Dawn in and many other volunteers. So
Hmm.
this is the succinct version of an answer.
Hmm.
Yes, huge impact on students and adults as well. One of the unique places where the Here to Tell exhibit was shown a few years ago was at the Calgary Public Library for the entire month of January, and over 90,000 people came in to see it. And I remember having a few incredibly meaningful conversations with, first of all, a number of women that were here from Ukraine while their husbands were fighting, still in the Ukraine, and how much hope they took from our survivors' experiences as a pathway of how do you move through and past trauma. And that was eye-opening for me because they were really articulate, very educated women living here with not a lot of support and help. Similarly, women from countries in Africa having a similar experience. So seeing that was incredible. That also held true when we would go into classrooms, knowing how many kids were here from other countries. They were first generation immigrants that had spent maybe a year or two in Canada in Calgary classrooms by the time we saw them. And so the stories hit really differently. A, having to deal with what they had been taught, if anything, about the Holocaust in their countries of origin, to also what they were learning at home about Jews.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and what does a Jew look like? And Dahlia and I will be the first to admit things that we used to do to try to like engage and get their attention. We don't do anymore. But literally, kids would not know what did a Jew look like. Dawn grew up in a town where people didn't know any other Jews, and so we were seeing that in the classroom. And so it really did impact the kids, and it impacted how we presented. So we changed our presentations in many ways to really try to give kids the opportunity to become critical thinkers. And how do you spend time figuring out where you should get your information from? While I
Hmm.
appreciate the comment that there's a lot of people that we think are educated about the Holocaust, I can't actually say that that's necessarily always true. That's maybe an assumption we make.
Hmm.
And certainly my experience being in big public spaces, particularly with the non-Jewish crowd, but even within our Jewish crowd, um, there isn't that level of depth of understanding of education with respect to the Holocaust and with respect to the history of Jews. And so that's actually part of our presentation in terms of talking about the history of anti-Semitism.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, all the way looking at the Middle Ages to what happened in Nazi Germany in the years preceding the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, and then what's happened since. And so we go there. And that didn't used to happen when I would present like 15 years ago with my grandmother. Now we talk about Jews come from Judea as a quick, easy example. And what does that mean? And it
Hmm.
allows for sticky conversations in a safe place
Right.
where we get to share information and talk about propaganda, old propaganda and today.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and it seems that, as things happen, as realities happen, there's an adaptation, right? So uh, it, it- things have grown and increased. Now, Here to Tell is an amazing aspect, but it's not the only thing that you guys have done, right? I mean, it is a huge, massive, beautiful educational piece that can grow beyond just us here in Calgary to other cities, other areas. We have in the boardroom, in the classroom. All that's great, but that's not the only thing you guys have done. You guys have managed to come up with an agreement with the public library a couple of years ago. that beautiful exhibit that was at the National Music Center. So, Dahlia, I want you to speak a little bit about where, with the focus being so much on Here to Tell, and it being, it's now grown well beyond that. We have speaker series. I'm looking right now at a book from Max Wallace, In the Name of Humanity. I remember the Mossad agent that we had down here to talk about Operation Finale. Like, there's been so much more than that, and it's grown. Where Tell us how it's grown and where it's going, and what some of the hopes are for its continued growth.
Well, I mean, Marnie and I, we're no longer co-chairs of the department. We
Right.
stepped down a few months ago. But what we were really, what our priorities were with regards to what we were partnering with the Calgary Public Library, we started an annual Holocaust education series. And so that was something Marnie and I took a lot of pride in. We would start planning a year in advance, and we were looking at what you know what can we offer Calgary, Jews and non-Jews, to educate them about topics related to the Holocaust, but also just trying to look at what are some of the universal applications to learning about the Holocaust. And so we would, bring in speakers who, some were Holocaust survivors. We would that would come and present. We brought in books on different topics just to get people thinking about the Holocaust in different ways. We didn't want, we wanted to keep it interesting and unique, and so that's something that we worked very hard at, to kind of bring different angles. That I believe is, the series is still happening this year. I know that the kickoff is January 27th, and that's always been the kickoff. January 27th is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so we worked, we worked with different people at the library who have always been wonderful, and just trying to keep, that not just educating students, but people who, historians, different people who might be interested in different topics, bringing the Holocaust into that. Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
Dahlia's being
go
really
ahead, Mark.
polite here. Dahlia really spearheaded it this year. So the person who's taken over the program is as the, I forget what her actual title is, Dahlia. What's Amy's title? The new or she's not she's the new not chair, but the person who's in charge of the department.
Coordinator, Holocaust coordinator.
Thank you. Coordinator is Amy Glassman Boyko, and she's phenomenal. And she's worked with us for many years, doing a lot of the behind the scenes things. So Dahlia actually spearheaded the incredible program that is coming up on January 27th, Chemin de Juif, and it's a beautifully meaningful program. And Amy really is the best person and is so utterly professional and so exceptionally good at what she's going to be doing going forward with Holocaust education and commemoration. And both Dahlia and I have tremendous confidence in what she's doing. And so the new system allows her to really oversee the different pieces, and allows volunteers like Dawn, Dahlia, and I right now, for example, going to classrooms to go in and do the work. So, for example, right now, Amy spearheaded and oversaw a great program at the library called 6 million one thread, or one thread 6 million, which was something created by two of the most extraordinary volunteers, Samantha Kessel and Brandon Harvey, who we met through our Violins of Hope program that we ran at the National Music Center a few years ago. So really kudos to Amy for taking this on, and kudos to the insane caliber that the department has in terms of volunteers. The breadth and the depth of knowledge is extraordinary. And that's what really makes it sing.
Our community has long valued the importance of uh, honoring our survivors and the memory of our survivors. And, for the last many years, you guys have been synonymous with that programming. And so I think, you know, the Jewish community, but as we talk about the programming, the partnerships that you guys have forged at the National Music Center, at some of our post-secondaries, at the public library, the greater Calgary community is a debt of gratitude. The two of you have done such amazing work. I owe you a debt of gratitude because without you guys, I mean, I got to interview Deborah Lipstadt and Ben Freeman, and these are speakers that you guys brought in, and I know you've asked Dawn to do the same. We've had amazing opportunities because of the work that you two have done. There are so many more questions to ask. I think the conclusion that we can come to is that we need a part two on this, if not a part three. Um, but what can I say? As your friend and as a fellow community member, I'm so grateful that you two stepped up. That Marnie, I'm so grateful that you were like, "I'll do this, but only with this Dahlia Libin that I think I'm going to really like."
Mhm.
And Dahlia, I'm grateful that Kevin talked you into it. You guys have been amazing, and we're grateful to have you in this community.
Yeah, I just want to add on that on a personal note. I mean, I was so ignorant as to Holocaust education as a whole. I mean, we're not even talking that long ago, 2018, 2019, where I didn't even identify myself as a descendant of Holocaust survivors. Well, my grandfather, he was in work camps. He wasn't in a death camp. So therefore, my other grandparents, they survived, the disease and everything through Russia. So they're not. And it was that understanding that I also could have a voice that was encouraged by both of you, and I think that has led to a lot of the advocacy, activism, and the courage to even do this podcast. So, to both of you, you know, I don't want to get all, but thank you both because of the strength that you have given me personally and the community through this. But I do want to just highlight one last thing. I guess what ask one last question. A school like all of this stuff that here to tell it's all it's done, Holocaust and human rights remembrance and education is part of Calgary Jewish Federation, going back to the alphabet soup just to make sure that everybody's kind of aware of which where it kind of belongs, but a lot of the funding that you get is through private donations, and some through federations, some through private donation, and there's a lot of different things. A school, because we're still working on where it fits in curriculum. There's a lot of questions. I think that's going to be left for part two, that discussion. But a school that is interested in having here to tell in the classroom or wants to come to symposium, how much does that cost and who do they contact?
It is free. And you just need to email the Amy at the Holocaust Department, and maybe you can put that email address up.
Hmm.
But yeah, we not only will we come out and do these presentations for free, but we also we want to work with teachers. And we're happy to customize presentations. We have, we've got so many different survivor presentations, and we can really focus on what the needs of the particular teacher is looking for. Um, we've got presentations also about propaganda, and that's one that I think, Jared, back to your point a little bit earlier about where is Holocaust education at. Really getting students to understand the power of words. The Holocaust didn't start with murdering; it started with words. It started with hateful words and the slow erosion of critical thinking and how society dealt with that. And so we are that is something that we see more and more that we're bringing into these presentations today. So we're happy to work with teachers, and yeah, free of charge.
Yeah. And
Uh,
Dawn gets all of them at Teachers Convention next month. So good luck to you on that one, Dawn.
Yeah, me and Sylvie are gonna rock it, folks. I think the biggest compliment I could pass on to both of you is your bubbies and Zadies would be extraordinarily proud of you. Thank you very, very much for being our guest today on the Schmooze.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us and making us feel so great and so beloved. Back at you, boys. Back at you. Thanks for doing
Thanks.
this. It's great to be on the Schmooze.